Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Workplace Wonder, Lessons from the Expert. I always get a little giddy and excited when I get to talk to friends on the podcast. This is somebody who I've known pretty much since I've gotten to the field, I think. I mean, I don't even remember when we first met. It's been so long. But it's somebody I can call a friend, a confidant, someone just who's a wealth of knowledge, who provides an incredible service to people who need it in the mental health field, and now is currently working for Family First Adolescent Services. And today's topic is cultural competency with Vanina Hocken. Hi, Vanina.
Blake, I feel
Thank
the
you.
same way about you. So happy to be here and have a conversation with a friend. I am so impressed and proud of the career and profession that you've built, and love seeing your journey and the amazing things that you've done. I'm always impressed by you and one of your biggest fans.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming on. And I always say when somebody says the career you've built, I always correct and say I'm building. It's never ending journey for all of us.
for all of us.
So, as always on the podcast, I like my guests to introduce themselves and give a brief background. The purpose of this is to be more inclusive. I have a feeling and a belief that people don't all feel the same way, same every day. I mean, so for us, we write these bios as professionals, and then some days someone will read our bio and we go like, I don't know if I feel that way today. Today, I care more about being a parent, or more about being a therapist, or someone from Argentina, whatever it may be. Something may resonate with you more differently on different days. So I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself on however you're feeling today.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And it does make sense for me to introduce myself today as someone who is culturally diverse,
Yes.
since that's kind of what we're talking about. So, my name is Vanina Hockman, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. That is my profession, but I am more than anything a mom, a woman, and a very proud Jewish Latin person. And I am always fighting for cultural competency in mental health care and in our field. And it's one of my passions because of what I've been through and my personal experiences. I immigrated to the United States when I was 10 years old from Argentina. And I was the first one in my family to learn English, and the
Wow.
first one in my family to maybe have experiences from my perspective, right? Of trying to navigate some of the healthcare systems, and even lawyers, or even things that I would accompany my parents to do, or help my parents write letters because maybe I was more proficient in the language. And I was exposed to things from a young age where it made me really aware of the need for that cultural competency
Yeah.
in the services that um, people seek. And being here in South Florida, where there's just so many cultures,
Hmm.
and we speak so many languages, and there's so many people that are in need, and understanding that, you know, I mean, especially substance use disorders, mental health disorders don't discriminate. And, we all suffer from them. And we want to be able to have accessibility to the same type of services that English speaking Americans do. So
Sure.
it's just one of the things that I want to make sure that, organizations have and are open at least to learning about.
Sure.
Um,
Well, and I
so
think you keep going. You got more?
no, that was just a little bit about me. I mean, I think I said a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm the director of clinical outreach at Family First Adolescent Services.
Yes, both a program that I love and respect very much. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I think that it's important for people to understand what cultural competency is, because I think there are a few misnomers about it, and there's some misconceptions about what it means to be culturally competent. Can you just tell us it just in a broad sense, what does it mean for a person or a program to be culturally competent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think more than anything, cultural competency is the ability for an individual to interact effectively with people of different cultures. And it doesn't necessarily mean that a person needs to be an expert in one certain culture. It just means that you want to have curiosity, be open-minded,
Mm,
and understand more of a cultural context of the target community that you want to reach, right?
right.
And have a willingness to be able to work with that culture and just be open-minded and wanting to work and learn and be curious. Really, that's what it is for me.
I love that. It's almost like instead of competency, curiosity is
Yeah.
is almost a better word to put in there, because it really, from my understanding of it, it's being open to other people's experiences and understanding that other cultures don't have the same experiences, perspectives, biases that you may have. So being willing to be flexible and open and curious when you're speaking to someone from a different culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's impossible for all of us to be experts in every single culture, you know.
Mm,
I'm gonna run into people of different cultures, and I can't say that just because I'm someone that advocates for cultural competency, I'm gonna be able to work with every single person, but I am a person that is very curious and open-minded and willing to learn and negotiate treatment and try to really understand where the other person's coming from.
yeah.
I think that that makes a big difference.
I think so too. And I think people, especially these days, are scared to ask questions of other cultures out of fear that they're going to offend somebody. But the truth is that people want to be asked those questions. They want an opportunity to feel seen and heard. And asking questions in a genuine and empathetic way, I imagine, is the best way to go about trying to learn about another culture and respect someone else that you're interacting with.
Yeah, and it's also a major way to connect to someone. And
Mhm.
when it comes to connecting to a person, but then also the person connecting to the treatment, if there isn't that connection, there's not going to be healing. I
Right.
always say that. So if the person is not connected to the process, is not connected to the treatment because they feel like they're, not in the right place, or they're not meeting the place is not meeting where they're at, or they're not being understood,
Right.
they're not going to connect. It's not going to be good for their recovery journey. It's not going to be good for their healing.
Hmm.
It's not going to feel safe. If you don't feel safe, it's what's the point of you going to treatment if you're not going to feel
Right.
safe in that environment?
It's a very vulnerable process that, in order for it to be effective, does require so much trust with the providers. So you have to feel like they can see every aspect of you and understand every aspect of you in order to move forward, or at least be willing to ask the questions to help
Yeah, and
them
sometimes
understand you better.
sometimes it's the validation, or even knowing that the other person is at least curious. So maybe you're not necessarily looking for the facility or the treatment provider or the center to make all these changes to accommodate you, but it's almost like, okay, they see me, they understand that I have different beliefs, they understand that I have, my culture requires a different diet or a different way of doing certain things, and they're respecting that.
Yes. Yeah, it's about making some accommodations and understanding that there's certain things that can be shaped and bent and heard in different ways in order to be able to be most effective. And it's I always see those things as little barriers to treatment. So when you're not being seen or there's little things with your culture that aren't being respected, they put up those little mini walls for you to be able to be treated effectively and can actually end up being a huge detriment to the success post program if those little things aren't respected, those little walls aren't taken down that kind of block you from being fully present while you're in treatment.
Yeah, 100%. You're right.
So when
Yeah.
you went to school to become a therapist, was the goal to be a full-time to kind of focus on a private practice, or did you always want to get to be working in behavioral health care or treatment programs? How did you make the transition? How did you end up where you are today?
Yeah. No, the goal was never to be here. So I don't know. I don't know what the goal was
Hmm.
actually. The goal was to the goal was to help people, I think.
Hmm.
Um, the the goal for me was to make people feel understood and to make sense of people's behavior based on their context. I always felt that you can make sense of people's behavior based on context.
Hmm.
Okay. So, and if somebody needed help or guidance doing that, then that was really my goal. Like, let me help this person make sense of their behavior, make sense of what's going on if we look at the context. The
Sure.
context could be so many things. Okay.
Right.
So that was really always the goal. Now, my career path went many ways. I started working for nonprofit organizations. I think deep down, a lot of me is actually more of a social worker than a therapist.
Hmm.
And I worked for Henderson Mental Health Center as a youth case manager. That was my first job out of, I have a bachelor's in psychology from UF. So while I was getting my master's, I was working as a youth case manager at Henderson. And I then worked for Mentor, which is a company that does licensing for foster homes. So I was
Oh,
licensing
wow.
foster homes. Yeah. Um, and then when I graduated with my master's in 2004, so 20 years ago, I was a therapist with JAFCO, Jewish Adoption Foster Care Options.
Yeah.
So I was a therapist with them. And after that, I had an opportunity to work with Kids in Distress. Kids in Distress is a nonprofit organization in Broward County. And they had a lot of great programs there. They still do. They have a lot of
Hmm.
great programs there. I was with Kids in Distress for 8 years. Eventually, I became a clinical supervisor at Kids in Distress. And then I wrote, I was part of a team that wrote a grant to have wraparound services for homeless families. And
Okay.
we were awarded the grant. It was a $5 million grant.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
yeah, for a program that we came up with. It was called the Heart Program. And I flew to Washington, D.C. while I was pregnant with Jake and Emma to go
Wow.
get awarded this grant in DC. It was so cool. And I came back from DC and I was program director for the Heart program with Kids in Distress.
Hey, Dan Bellwether, you better be after getting that going, getting a
Yeah,
$5 million grant going.
I
You
know.
better
It
be
was the
director.
biggest grant ever, I think, in Broward County back
Wow.
then. Yeah. And then I worked up until like 2 weeks before giving birth to Jake and Emma. I was huge, obviously, with like a big belly. And then after having them, I stayed home for a year and went back into private practice. I wanted to have like the flexibility to be home with the kids and always loved working. So, you
Yeah.
know, I went to private practice and a mutual friend of ours,
Hmm.
Liza, was working at Bougainvillea House, and then she started working as clinical outreach for Retreat Behavioral Health when Retreat opened their location here in Florida. And
Right. So
she,
that's how I first met you.
exactly.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, Jake and Emma were like 3.5, maybe.
Wow. My God.
Yeah, they just turned 11.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time is
So
flying. Yeah,
I know.
I met you very early in my career. I mean, I was like a couple years in.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So Liza reached out and she's like, listen, Retreat's looking for someone to do clinical outreach in Miami. They're looking for a Spanish speaking clinician to really do outreach in Miami. And I was like, I don't know anything about business development or outreach or, and
Yeah.
she's like, you need to come meet with the owner, take a tour, you can do it. And and I did. And that's how I started with this side of things. And it's been like an amazing, I think it was an amazing career opportunity for me. And it dips into a lot more of like my passions because I
Hmm.
get to be really creative. I get to do public speaking. I get to advocate. I get to be a leader, but I still get to help so many families. I
Yeah.
have so much direct contact with families. I love being seen as a resource. I love guiding families to find the best care possible for their kids and their family members. And I get to do that in so many different ways.
Yeah.
So,
It makes so much sense for you. And I think with your focus of wanting to meet people where they're at and focus on the context of you being able to be that resource and hear the family out and see what they need and then connect them with the appropriate resources. It's just such a good fit for you and such a natural progression for your career to go to. Plus, I think you serve as a great example of and a great message to people that if you're in one career, you're able to make a shift or make little pivots to make it work for you so that it's still speaking to your passions, that you still get fulfillment out of it, but maybe it's not the exact thing that you initially thought it was going to be. And you made those little switches and pivots and moves to make it fit who you are, because you are a very social person. You
mm,
do like to get out there. You love to travel. You love to be out there. And this is a perfect way for you to use your degree and be in the mental health field and help families while also being able to scratch those other itches.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, the part of like being able to put events together and maybe even I don't know, write a blog and even come up with like a graphic for an invite, like all those things I really
Yeah,
enjoy. And like I
sure.
find fulfillment in
Yeah,
those
yeah.
things too. So to
Amazing.
be able to do those things it's fun. It's just a lot of fun for me. So it's really nice that I get to kind of fill all the buckets.
Well, and what's cool too, as you said, you get to do public speaking now, and I know that you've nationally spoken now about cultural competency in the behavioral health field, which I think is really important, and it kind of all comes back to your initial mission as well. When you talk about understanding people in context, that to me is cultural competency, understanding the context the person lives in. And there's those different layers to a person that we've talked about, you and I have talked about in the past. It's not just about your family or your race or your whatever it may be. It goes so much deeper to create a person's culture that they live in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes all you have to do is ask questions and ask different questions and ask them differently. It's not just, you can't, when we're talking about doing an admission or when we're talking about doing an interview, or even if it's just that one phone call that I have with a family who's reaching out because it's the first time they've ever reached out because they want their son or daughter to go into care, I don't always ask the same questions, as they start telling me like their story. I want to ask them questions that make sense for them, or that's going to
Right.
give me the information that I need to guide them in the right direction. Um, and it takes, um, I think, you know, I don't know, it's like a willingness and you have to give yourself, um, like it's like some ability to be able to really join with that person, and then interest in what that person is, where they're coming from,
Yes.
what's going on. It's like a little of
It's
an investigation.
it's almost like you're removing your ego from the conversation. You're removing your biases. I think it's really important that we know our biases, our own biases,
Yeah.
and where our own insecurities come up, which I want to get into a little bit of an exercise that you've done around that, but then also really using that active listening muscle of knowing how to respond, not react to what you're hearing, and being adaptive in the moment and really taking the time to give your full attention to a person and knowing what questions to ask and what matters to them. And I think most of all, I mean, I know we talked about biases and we're going to, but not making assumptions based on a person's culture.
Yeah, never.
Um, Stereotyping can really get in your way. In fact, I know, and I think I told you this, there was a family that we were working with that was at one point in my career that was from a certain culture. And we were doing an intervention with the family. And based on what I know about that culture, there's a ton of respect for parents. And this was a young man, about 18 years old. And in that culture, the parents really hold all the power. And there's a ton of respect for them. And so I ignored the signs that in this case that I was making an assumption based on what I understood about the culture as like a stereotype essentially, and made a huge mistake and ended up costing us almost the entire day of having to undo the lack of preparation we did because we assumed that this person would just listen to their parents and go. And we didn't ask the right questions because we sort of left that off the table because we figured it wouldn't be a problem. And it's came back to bite me, and it served actually as a really powerful pivotal moment in my career of not making those assumptions and making sure I'm asking all the right questions and really hearing each individual family, regardless of background, hearing their truth and understanding where they're coming from and what does their situation look like and how is it maybe influenced by their culture, but not assuming that there's certain tendencies or certain behaviors that are going on because of their culture.
Yeah. Yeah, so important. And I think I mean, I take a lot into consideration, especially when I'm working with Latin families, and I just speak to that more because I have a lot of experience with that, that we have second generation American kids, right? Or first generation American kids,
Right.
and their way of thinking and their way of doing things, it is completely different. And the parents' culture might be like, this is how we do things, this is how we
Mm-hmm.
have done things in the past, this is how our culture wants it done. But the kids were born here, grew up here, are exposed to different things, and they want to change. They
Yeah.
want to change those aspects of, what the culture calls for. And
I'm
you
sure you
have to
see a
take
lot of that at Family First. I mean, you're treating the youth, and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of them trying to undo what maybe their parents did or do things in a different way. And it's interesting because I feel like this conversation about cultural competency, and we're talking about it in terms of behavioral health care and treatment provided, but really it's an understanding of, again, the context. We'll go back to that for parents to even understand this is really important, that their kids are growing up in a different world and they're
Yeah,
influenced by the world around them, just like you were influenced by the world around you. So they don't necessarily have to align with you. And if you can try to understand them better, you may be able to connect with them a little better.
yeah, absolutely. Yep, you
Good.
got it.
Gonna make a reel out of that one.
Yeah.
Um, no, so I want to talk about the exercise. So you recently gave a presentation at a conference about cultural competency, and there was something that I told you before this. I'm trying to figure out how to work into one of my presentations, which I may just flat out steal it. I hope you don't mind.
I don't.
Where you gave people stickers as they walked into the room, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the exercise and what the intention of it was and how it influences or plays a role in the topic?
Yeah. So as they were walking into the room to the presentation, I asked them permission if I could give them a sticker that looked like a button. So it was like a little circle. And I said, is it okay if I give you a button? They're randomly selected. It's part of an exercise. And if they gave me permission, I would give them a button. And the buttons were things like a button that said the Dream Act, a button that said Viva la Raza, a button that said Make America Great Again, a button that said
It was a Rastafarian one, right?
the Rastafarian flag with a marijuana leaf, a rainbow flag I had. Oh, I had a Confederate flag as
Mm,
well. So it was all these different buttons that it was meant to obviously cause a possible initial reaction when you see someone wearing one of these buttons. Okay, possibly.
right.
So I let them wear the button for the beginning of the presentation without saying anything. And as people were coming in, I was giving everybody all these buttons, and everybody, I could see them like talking, laughing, kind of like, looking at
Yeah.
each other, who has what button type of thing. And I started with my presentation, and maybe 15 minutes into the presentation, I brought up the subject of unconscious bias. And unconscious bias is really something that we all have. And it's nothing malicious or nothing wrong, but it's where our brain goes when we initially see something because it just feels safe to our brain. I
Mhm.
mean, it's something that we've been exposed to maybe throughout our lives or something that we've learned throughout our lives. And so when we see something, we might stereotype or we might make an assumption based on those things, but we don't do it with malicious intent. We do
Sure.
it because, sometimes that's kind of like our brain finds that safe because that's the information that we know.
It's conditioning. It's like cultural conditioning, or we see certain things and we make certain assumptions based on that. It's our brain
Correct.
connecting the dots.
Yeah. And this is really interesting because as I was preparing for this presentation, Blake, I found so many articles about unconscious bias when talking about um, employers hiring employees. And
Mhm.
when you look at a resume, things that you look at that might cause you initially to put the resume away,
Oh,
or, you know, like, ageism, obviously gender bias, name bias, um, there was something called the halo effect. Like if you see someone that went to Harvard,
yep.
then like almost you think like, oh, this person is amazing and it's going to be a great employee. I'm definitely interviewing this person,
Mm.
so
There,
it had like
I don't want to get us too off track, but yes, we've learned quite a bit about this, and I've seen it. And one of the professors that I was working with last semester talked about this a bit. Of they have to watch for halo effect in grading, and it's something that they're constantly considering because there might be certain students that they really like, and they have a tendency to go easier on them on their papers, and so it's something they have to be really careful of. Also with
that's why I always kissed ass to all my teachers.
Yeah, yeah, me too. That's why I'm always trying to get on a Zoom and make them laugh. If I can make them laugh, I feel like the grades it'll be much better.
Yeah.
Um, the other piece was with hiring though, the same type of thing. If you're in an interview, And you, as the potential employee, remind the interviewer of an old friend or of somebody they really like, or you make them laugh or you make them feel good. They may end up totally disregarding everything that says that, hey, you're a really bad fit for this job,
Right.
and hire you just because they liked you or you remind them of someone they liked.
Right, right. So those are all examples of unconscious biases too, right?
Yeah,
You're not even
exactly.
conscious that you're making these biases, but they
Yeah.
are, you know. So
Attractiveness, by the way, is a big one with that too.
big one.
Attractive people tend to
Yes,
have a lot of things in their favor.
correct. 100%. Yeah.
Go
Um,
ahead, sorry.
So anyway, so when I get to this part of my presentation, basically I ask them, okay, now when I get to the buttons, turn to the person next to you. And the first thing I say to them is grab a piece of paper and a pen and write just some things that you think about that person based on just seeing them and whatever button they're wearing, you know. And people write their assumptions. I mean, if you're wearing a rainbow flag, they assume that you are from the LGBTQ community, you know.
Mm,
If you are wearing the Make America Great Again, they assume you're a Trump supporter,
right.
you know, and that you are a Republican and that like all these people like make assumptions based on the button. And then I ask them to tell me, what if this person came into your office as a client and they were wearing this button? Would you treat them differently? Would you be able to get past the button? Would you ask different questions?
Mm,
Um, and I ask for feedback, and it's such an amazing exercise. People are so honest, and I'm so happy that they're so honest. Depending on the crowd, if it's a very, very clinical crowd and there's a lot of therapists, most therapists will say, um, no matter what button they're wearing, I'm gonna ask
yeah.
questions. I'm gonna be curious, and I'm gonna treat every patient that comes to
Hmm.
my office, and they have pretty like PC answers, but sometimes it people get real and they say, if this person came into my office, I think I would have to really refer out, or I would have to ask someone to come into the office and sit with me because I would be afraid that I would be maybe standoffish or aggressive or not treat them the way I would treat someone else because I have really strong feelings against what they stand for because they're wearing the one of the buttons that like
Sure.
triggers me, so it's really,
Hmm.
you know are you pushing buttons or are the buttons pushing you? I
Yeah,
always,
I like that.
yeah.
It's such an
So
interesting and then so you're making the unconscious bias conscious, essentially.
yeah, and it's really not anything to do with what the buttons represent, and it has nothing to do with what button you got or anything. It has more to do with what reaction did you have.
Hmm.
What came up for you first, right? What if this was a coworker and they sat in the cubicle next to you every day and they, had this button on them one day? Like, would that ruin your working relationship?
Yeah.
What would you think about them?
Such an
So
interesting, I wonder if that's like a human defense mechanism, like where our brain tries to put the pieces together based on context clues, and we just make assumptions to protect ourselves. And it's just such an interesting idea, but it really doesn't have a place in work. I mean, really in the world. It's such an incorrect assumption that so I think so few people challenge. is their knee-jerk reactions to people, to situations, to certain context clues. It's that's why I really love that exercise. It's just such like an important piece. And it also kind of reminds us that all of this much bigger work really starts with us,
That's what it is.
which is
Yeah.
I feel like everything I learn, every experience I have working with companies, it always comes back to starting with ourselves and then expanding that out. But we don't do the work and they're not willing to challenge our beliefs, our privileges, or and being open to this type of work. It's really hard to make progress in the workplace. And I
Yeah.
think that's where a lot of the DEI stuff fails in a lot of corporations, is that it just becomes an initiative for you guys to do, but not for the leadership team. And that's the representation isn't there for leadership. They're not doing the work. So nothing actually changes behavior wise.
Yeah, that is so true. And um we talk about it often on the DEI committee for NATAP. Um, that's really what we talk about the most, really, because we're here. We have an advisory committee. We meet regularly. We talk about all these issues. We came up with a stages of change assessment for leadership to do and staff to do. We have a very diverse group in the DEI committee, right?
Mhm.
But um, it's the leaders that have to do the actual changes and the actual work, and that's kind of like where it stops.
Yeah.
Yeah. And who sits at the table too.
Yeah. True. And supports it. And there's so many different things to consider with it. I think that's where DEI got the bad rap, and then it's turned into a political issue now, and it's a whole big mess. But real, true DEI initiatives are so effective, and they forget how it improves your bottom line, because it does. And having a diverse workforce who feels respected and psychologically safe is huge for
Huge.
companies in terms of productivity, of performance. It's huge. Um, just alone though in retention and reputation and respect and culture, it's so important. But as we've said, it's so often a superficial attempt at DEI of inclusion, and it leads to nothing. And then just it's nixed. It's the first thing that's nixed as soon as some budget cuts have to happen.
Yeah. Not only that, but if it's not genuine and if it's not authentic, um, we see right through it. Like
Mhm.
people that are aware see right through it.
There
So
was a case study.
it almost makes it worse, you know?
Right, exactly. And so there was a case study that I saw of that we were reading through and trying to dissect a little bit. And it was about an organization, a very well-known organization that was trying to implement a DEI initiative. Yet for some reason it wasn't sticking. And they seemed to be doing all the right things. Like when you read the case study, it was like 25, 30 pages long, just describing what they're doing. You're going like, seems great, yet it wasn't sticking. And it was, if it was moving very slowly. And it come to find out, as you read on and you kind of read between the lines, you realize that it's the middle and lower level employees that this initiative is being initiated in, and the upper level employees was like 99% white men, and none of it applied to them. And so it was that lack of representation that wasn't, no one was taking it seriously. Like if my boss isn't willing to do this, then why do I care?
Yeah. Isn't that what it is for most initiatives though? Like, or for anything really in a company's culture?
Mhm.
Like it has to come from the top. It has to
Always.
trickle, it has to be that trickle down effect
Yeah.
in anything, like in any
Yeah.
type of attitude and any type of and yeah, in everything. It's so important. If it's not like top down,
Yeah. I call it trickle down vulnerability, trickle down empathy. We've got to set the tone as leaders. We have to set the tone of what's going to be allowed and what's going to happen in our organizations. We have to walk the walk and talk the talk. Just
Yeah,
talking, it doesn't work.
no, no. And I
Um,
mean,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No.
No. There's so much that like we could keep going down this path, and I think what I appreciate the most about you is that you are speaking up and you are educating people about this in a way that doesn't feel like you're not coming down on people. You're not trying to shove anything down their throats. You are doing this in a way that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're truly educating people on the importance of this topic. And I know that you are making a difference in the field by getting out there and speaking about this important topic. What I hope, and I'm not speaking for all white men, but what I'm going to say is that I hope that more white men, white women, white people in general who maybe lack cultural diversity um, are willing to take a look at themselves and to see where bias and privilege show up and not be offended. I always talk about this on the podcast that we need to remove that there's a stigma when you say certain words and we label them as right and wrong at some point. And usually it's because we're feeling defensive. We feel uncomfortable. So we say that's bad. And words like privilege or bias have somehow become bad words for a lot of people, where they're just not willing to take a look at it. And the reality is, it exists within our society. And the
Mhm.
more that we can look at it, the more that we realize that we can start making changes to the way society operates and making it more equitable and inclusive. But it's up to all of us. It can't just be people who are in minority situations making all the noise. It has to be everybody. We all have to get in this together. And that's inclusivity.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love hearing that from you. Obviously, you keep, I think, influencing the companies, the right people. I love the fact that you're doing this work for companies, for leadership teams, because they need to hear it. This is what we can do, right? Like, I can go out there, I can take it case by case also, which
Mhm.
is what I do also. But then whenever I have a platform, whenever I can advocate, whenever I can attend a conference with diverse cultures, with topics of diversity, I'm going to do as much as I can to expose myself and to expose others. Um, but just like in everything, it's one person at a time, I guess.
Well, and you do it in a way that's how you do it, right? That's how you make the difference one person at a time. And you're doing it in a way that's not offensive in any way to anybody, but you're trying to slowly make the changes and you're walking the walk and talking the talk like we discussed. And
Yeah.
I think that's how you make the changes is it's great if you want to get out there. We can all get out there and I can make a killer presentation on anything. I'm pretty confident in my presentation abilities. I can make a presentation right now on anything and probably get a public speaking engagement on any topic. But what am I doing outside the hours of the presentation? Am I living what I'm talking about? Am I actually uh, am I being the person that I'm telling other people to be?
Right.
And
And
that's
doing,
where we make the difference.
yeah. Yeah. It's important being in these positions that we're in, where we do get the chance to have the platform. Um, it comes off unauthentic if you don't follow through the way that you're just saying, right? Like if I'm just coming to, if I'm just conference hopping and presenting, but then someone sends me a case and I don't give it the attention that it needs or the guidance that it needs, or, if, people know that they can send me a Latin family, or people know that they can send me an Orthodox Jewish family, for
Mhm.
example. And I'm going to spend extra time. I'm going to understand them and I'm going to guide them in the right direction. Um, if I don't follow through with that, then what am I doing?
Right.
I have to make sure that, like you said, talk the talk and walk the walk, right?
Right.
So. Yeah.
And I hope people are willing, based on if they hear this conversation, they're willing to start challenging some of those beliefs. Maybe you start understanding why you have knee-jerk reactions to certain people, or start noticing what comes up for you. What assumptions are you making? You can't really make changes until you do that work and start to identify the little assumptions and biases that we have. Once you do, then you can decide, does that actually serve me anymore? And does that serve other people? Or should I get rid of that?
I think that's what makes our industry so amazing, is that we all do put ourselves out there, most of us, right? To challenge ourselves, to grow, to look within, to do that work. And
Mhm.
those are the professionals that end up, I think, um, with that career journey that we initially started talking about, that continue with that development, um, and that put in the effort to do the work within. Otherwise, you start seeing, once again, like how unauthentic it is, right? If you're not doing your own work,
Right.
you can just see through bullshit. I feel
Yep.
like I can sniff bullshit like so quickly, right?
Yeah.
And that's because we do a lot of the work ourselves,
Right.
because that's what we're asking people to do.
Right. So we better damn well be showing up and doing the work ourselves and really making that. You can't, like you said, and I think that's a normal human instinct, is that people can smell bullshit. And sometimes we don't know that that's what's happening, but there's something inside of us that's saying, this feels wrong. I don't know what this
Yeah.
is. I don't like this interaction and I don't know why. But oftentimes it is because you're in a non-authentic interaction right now, or somebody's telling you to do something that maybe they're not living their truth. And as you talked about before, I mean, what's that saying? It's like, heavy is the head that wears the crown. That's a saying, right? So if you do get out there and you start advocating for this type of stuff, it is important for you to show up authentically and be able to be culturally competent and um, really kind of walk that walk, as we've been saying, because there's a lot of pressure on you now to actually show up. And that's how I see a lot of people losing credibility, is they get out there and they talk about a certain topic
Yeah.
and they position themselves as an expert, and then they're not actually living that in their day-to-day lives. And that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
So we need a lot less superficial words out there, and then initiatives like DEI would be a lot more successful.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think we've explored this topic, and I know it's been over an hour, about to be an hour, so I want to let you go. But where can people find you? So let's plug Family First. So what is Family First?
Family First is a residential treatment center for adolescent boys in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. We are duly licensed for mental health and substance use disorders. We can treat primary mental health with or without substance use. I would say we are just different from the rest of the adolescent world, because we are truly designed to treat the underlying issues that are driving the behaviors. We are, more than anything, a complex trauma treatment center. We are very family immersive. We are kind, loving, compassionate program, really respect the boys, really respect the families,
Mhm.
and an extremely sophisticated clinical program, um, to help the families heal and recover, and very, very, um, I would say, all around. When I say wraparound, as far as academic, clinical, experiential, case management, we hit it all. So,
Yeah.
an amazing program.
And I've had a few people from different treatment centers on this podcast in the past, which they're all good programs, but I don't think there's any that I've worked as intimately with as Family First. And I can honestly say that everything you just said is so spot on. And it is really one of the best programs. If you have a loved one who is a adolescent who is needing some type of assistance or help, I mean, I would reach out to Vanina. Whether they can go there or not, Vanina would help you find the right program. But Family First is honestly, it's an incredible program that I've always had nothing but respect, love, and admiration for.
Thank you. You've always been so supportive, and I know we worked so many cases together, and
Mhm.
it's always been amazing working with you and the families that we have helped. It's been, you know,
It's been
it's just
cool.
beginning too.
Yep, just starting out.
Yeah.
Just starting out. And then is there anything else that you would like to plug? How about LinkedIn? People can find you on LinkedIn, right?
People can find me on LinkedIn. I guess I don't know my LinkedIn thing, but it's Vanina Hoffman. Yeah.
They'll look for you. I'll be
Yeah.
sure to tag if you're listening to this or you're watching this on YouTube. Either way, I'll be sure to include links to Family First, to Vanina's LinkedIn. And is there anywhere else you'd like me to include?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, awesome. Well, thank you for joining me on this. I always love talking to you. It's the best.
Thank you, Blake. I enjoy talking to you always.
And
And
well, I was just going to say, if you are listening to this or watching this, do me a favor. If you are watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, and comment something that you've learned from this conversation. And in fact, I might challenge you to maybe be vulnerable and leave some type of unconscious bias that you've experienced recently in the comment section. And in fact, I will do that to start off the conversation so people can join in and they can feel safe doing so. If you're listening to this podcast, leave 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. If you didn't like the conversation, you can just keep moving. You don't got to leave that review. But I'm sure you did love it as I did. And that's it. That's another episode of The Workplace Wonder. Thank you, everybody.